It's Brad Allen again, and today we're going to tackle pricing a house or comping a house, right? If you're cool, you say comping. If you're not, you say pricing. I'm just kidding. But here's the thing. There's no rhyme or reason to comping a house. And I've never seen any company have training around it. Of course, except for the art of real estate, right? But with all jokes aside, a lot of agents I've noticed in the recent past when I ask them for their comps, like maybe we have a house and we just can't figure out the price. Like, how'd they come up with this number? One of my favorite things to do is reach out to that listing agent and say, hey, would you mind sharing the comps that you used with us so we can kind of put our buyer at ease and let them know the house is worth it? It's not really why I'm doing it. I'm doing it because I want to see if they even did comps. And you know what they'll send me? They'll send me an RPR report. They'll send me some like computer generated bullshit, right? And it's not actually comps. You're using an algorithm to price a house. And you know, a good example is, well, I've got an agent right now, we're pricing a house, but it's an older town and the house is older and it's a farm style house. It was built in the early 1900s. It is not an easy house to comp. And if I was to use RPR, which I think is a fantastic product, by the way, or some automatic valuation tool, it's not going to take into consideration the style, the age, the character, the coolness. Like, it's just not. And if you're pricing a house by using automation tools, it's not gonna go so well for you. So I wanna break some things down for you today. This is how I do it. This is how I've been doing it for the last 18 years. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. And if you got different ways of doing it, like drop them in the comments below. So let's start out, like what are comps, right? Comps are the comparable sales, right? So we're just gonna break this down to like super basic. Let's say you just got in the business, and so I wanna make sure you understand from the very get-go. Here's what I look at. When I'm looking at comps, I wanna look at sold comps. So I'm gonna talk to you like I'm doing comps for a buyer. When I'm doing comps for a buyer, that mentality is making sure the math checks out. So you've got a price, right? You've got a price that they want. And what you're trying to do for your buyer is like, hey, is the house really worth that? And you're just trying to justify or recalibrate the price. I'm like, hey, actually buyer, that's like 10 or 12 grand over. Or, hey, it's really priced competitively. When you're pricing a listing, you have no basis to go off of. So you've really got to start from scratch. So when I'm looking at comps, like I said, I want to look at sold data first. That means the house went on the market. We know how long it was there. We know what they were asking. We know what they got. And we know what the answer is to the test, right? Pendings are cool, but they're not helpful. Pendings typically don't show you the contract price, which they shouldn't. So therefore, they really don't have a value to me. The only value they do give me is that the market is healthy and there are things moving. So that's good. Actives, I like to use for listings. So if there's active properties, that gives me some information on where we should enter the market with our pricing. And I'll make this all make sense in a minute. So first, we're gonna start with closed data. I like to go back 6 months, maybe a year, depends on what time of the year. So like right now I'm shooting this video, it's January. The last 6 months are typically the slower 6 months of the business cycle when it comes to selling houses. So maybe it doesn't give me a full tilt of what's going on. So I might go back a whole year. So I like to start, let's just say with a year, and I like to start with the neighborhood or whatever you can define as the neighborhood. Sometimes it's a city, like city grid pattern, you need to figure that out. But I like to start with the neighborhood. By starting with the neighborhood, that means that people directly around me have bought those houses, and those are gonna be our best comparable sales, in my opinion. Sometimes there's not enough comps. And I usually look for 3 to 5 comparable sales to justify my price. Once I look at the data, I look at the neighborhood. If I can get 3 to 5 comparable sales out of that market, that actual neighborhood, then I'm good. But sometimes I can't. So what happens next? Well, maybe I go further back to 12 months if I was at 6, but after that, I expand it to the elementary school zone. That's the next smallest geographic area that I could use that doesn't put me way outside the bounds, but yet also keeps it kind of closer to the house. And one of the things I think about when I do this is if somebody's willing to live in that school zone, they're usually willing to live anywhere in that school zone. So I think it gives me good comparable sales. And then I see what I get. Well, if I've got 3 to 5, cool, we move on. But if I've got 15, then I got to start to narrow them down a little bit. And so maybe I'll go in there and do beds and bath count. Or if it's square footage, and I got too many properties, then I'll go, my personal opinion, 300 square feet above or below. So if it's 2,000, I'll go 1,700 to 2,300. If that brings me 3 to 5, I'm good. If it still has 20, then I might bring it down a little bit and bring it closer. I don't put a whole lot of value on age unless it's a big distinction, like you're comping a brand new house and everything else around you is 45 years old. Or you're listing a 100-year-old farmhouse, right? Those things will factor in, but usually it's not that. What buyers are looking for is I want a 2,000 square foot, 4-bed, 1-story house. Typically, if it's updated, that's great. So that's just like being a brand new house sometimes. I like to then go through the pictures. So I know what my listing looks like, or if it's a buyer that's buying a house, I know what that house looks like. And I go through and start comparing quality, right? This kitchen was better, so this bathroom was better, this was this. So it gives me some visual effects to go off of. After that, then we have to do the actual comparing of the price. Don't forget to read the remarks. Oftentimes those will give away a lot of clues, like as an estate sale, buyers got to move. They put words in there that let you know this thing probably sold faster and for less than it should have, but there were some extra circumstances you need to take into consideration. Some things that I don't do when pulling comps, I don't do a radius search. Now, let me be clear what that means. So you can go into most MLSs and say, hey, pull listings within a 1-mile radius. Guys, that might be different schools, that might be different zip codes, that might be different neighborhoods. A lot of these algorithms that you sign up for, that's what they do. They don't know the difference from one street to another, but you should. Now, sometimes I'll do a polygon search, right? That's helpful if you're in a city center and it's all in a grid pattern. So maybe you want to look at these 4 square blocks. Like that makes sense, and you could use a polygon search for that. So once I figure out the house, the area, so am I gonna go off the neighborhood, or do I need to go up to the elementary school zone? And once I get the right comps, then I consider the condition and the improvements, right? What happens after that? Well, you kind of got to use your gut feeling on it a little bit. Now that sounds strange, but there's 2 things in my mind that factor into a price. And what I like to do if I'm listing a house is I like to give a low range and a high range, and I let the clients kind of dictate where the price goes between there. So I use the nicest house that's for sale or that's sold, and I use the house that's still comparable, but it sold for a lot less, and that's my range. Well, sometimes if they're right in the middle, and let's say the nicest house sold for $250, and I think their house is probably close to $210, they may say, oh, I want $250. And you're like, okay, well, I want the pictures, and that one had gold, it had granite, it had this, it had that. What that tells us is we'd have to take your house and put it gold, granite, and all those other things, and that's gonna cost $100,000 to do. So is that really worth to spend $100,000 to make another 40? No, absolutely not. So that helps them understand that I can get top dollar if I want to make some investments, but most likely I don't want to, so the 210 looks right. So once we get to that range, then I leave it to the client to decide, right? What I really want to focus on with the client is the strategy. What is their life circumstance? Do they have to be gone in 2 weeks? Can they hold the house forever? Because you can always get top dollar for a house, most likely, but it just may take you longer. Or you can sell it super quick, but you can't have them both. So you got to take into that and make some adjustments. But the other thing I want to factor in is when your clients go, hey, I just painted, or hey, I put a patio in. Well, if you look at the way that we price it based on heated square footage, patios have no use to us, but people love them, right? So how do you factor those things in? One of the ways I look at it is I call it sellability, right? And I'm sure there's a term out there other people use. I explain to a client like this. We have your house and the house next door, and say they're identical, but you have a patio and they don't. Well, if the person wants a patio, they're gonna buy your house faster than the one that doesn't, right? It kind of makes sense. But they're not gonna be like, oh, you have a patio, let me give you $10,000 more. They're not gonna pay you more for it, but they may be more willing to give you the money you're asking because you have it. So the sellability takes into considerations like detached sheds, garages, pools, play sets, patios, stuff like that. After you've done all this, here's what I'd recommend too. Have somebody else run comps as well. One of the things I preach is we do a 2-step listing appointment, and here's the reason why. Go see the house, see what it's like, see the condition, see what it smells like, right? All that's gonna factor in. And then go back to the office and do some math. Don't take comps with you. Like that makes you no better than an algorithm system like Zillow, right? Go back and do math. And if you feel hung up, ask somebody in the office to run comps, or probably ask your broker, run comps with me and see what I'm missing. Doesn't mean they're right, doesn't mean you're wrong. It just lets you know that you're on the right path. But I will say this, there's sometimes we can't figure out comps. And you can get an appraiser to come do an appraisal for far less than a normal appraisal, because they're not gonna have to do all the bank crap with it, but they can still let you know, hey, if I was doing this appraisal, I would pull this house from over here and this house from over here, and it really extends your search. It also keeps you having an argument with your seller, because you're like, hey, here's what the appraiser said. And also when buyers agents call you and say, hey, where'd you get the price from? You can say, hey, we had an appraisal done, which gives you a little validity to it, right? So here's what I'm trying to say. Here's how I'm gonna wrap it up. Every house is different. And what we need to do is we need to price houses with theories. Hey, if I price your house with 100-year-old houses in this zip code, here's what it's gonna be. If I price your house with just this neighborhood, here's where it's gonna be. If I price your house with all the other houses that are on busy roads, here's the price. So you kind of go through it and you lay it out. Like there's 3 different ways we can price this, Mr. and Mrs. Seller. What do you think we should do? And you kind of leave it to them, because you're creating a strategy and a theory, and then you gotta test it. You're not gonna bat 1,000 at this, that's okay. But just remember, go into the MLS, go back 12 months, get with houses in the neighborhood first. If you have 5 to 6 comps that are comparable in size and quality, once you get there, go through the pictures, look at the quality and the condition of the property and see if your house is better or worse, and start putting pen to paper and trying to figure that out. Once you do that, you should be able to compare that house with things that are selling. And then if all else fails and you can't do it and you can't figure it out and there aren't comps, call an appraiser, call in your broker, get a separate opinion, and then go back. Sellers have never been mad at my pricing. They get mad at your pricing when you can't back it up and you just pull it out of your behind, right? So go in there with some knowledge, go in there figuring it out, and then go in them with a plan. But at the end of the day, you know you've done your job and you've priced it to the best of your ability. If this got long-winded and you're like, hey, I'm already asleep, cool. But if you price differently, drop a comment below and let me know how you do it, all right? There's different ways to skin this cat. This is the way that I preach it. It works pretty well, but I'm always open to hearing other ways.